this is going to be a tutorial on how I made my vampire brow. This is the sculpting section. So initially I held up a piece of cling film onto my face, and using a permanent marker I drew out where the vampire brow was going to sit. So basically I drew that outline first of where I wanted it to end, and then drew the wrinkles in it. So I had this kind of basic idea of how big it should be. And then once I had that, I moved on to my bathroom tile to sculpt. So first of all I held the cling wrap onto the board, and I used a pencil just to kind of trace roughly where the outline would be. And once I had just a basic shape, I'm going to start with a layer of clay. So I'm using Chavant NSP Medium clay, and it can be quite firm when you first start working with it. So I usually heat mine up with a hairdryer and work it in my fingers a bit before I start sculpting. So once it's warmed up and kind of softened a bit, I'm just going to put a few pieces down onto the board, and just using my fingers and the heat of my fingers also helps just to smooth it out, to get like a basic shape down first. Once that's there, I want it to be like really smooth. So first of all I'm going to use this wooden tool just to smooth out the edges to get it kind of a nice thin blendable edge. And it's going to be more blended towards the top. And then I'm going to use this rake tool just to rake over the whole surface so that there's not really that many ridges or bumps, it's all pretty much flat. And then to get rid of the rake marks, I'm going to use another tool that I got from Ken's Tools, which will just basically flatten out the surface even more, so I've got just a really flat, refined, easy surface to sculpt on. And then once I have that, I'm going to put the cling film down, and this will basically just soften all the tool marks that I'm going to use now, so I get a nice kind of textured skin. And so I'm going to use, first of all, that brush with plastic bristles, and then also this Ken's tool rake, just to get some fine lines into that for a skin texture. I'm going to use some, I think it's like medium grit sandpaper that will kind of have a pore-like, that will basically create the pores, so we're going to stamp that, and then using a stipple sponge, I'm going to stamp that as well, and then just kind of rub to get the texture nice and smoothed out and pretty even. And once you've got a good base with a basic skin tone for working on, I'm going to use one of my dental tools. I'm going to basically just trace in the basic shape. This isn't to get the wrinkles, you don't want it to be deep, this is just to kind of have an outline of where you're working. And so I'm using this, using the cling wrap as a reference, and also looking at my reference photo from the Monstrous Makeup Manual as I trace this outline. Once that's done, I'm going to start. So what we're going to do is we're going to build up the area around the wrinkles rather than dig into the wrinkles, as that looks a lot more natural, especially if it's a furrowed brow. We're going to get those muscles furrowing together, like, you know what I mean. You can get the look of those muscles under the skin. So first of all I'm going to roll up some sausages of clay, and I'm going to stick them down. I want them to be more blended out towards the top and a bit harsher down the bottom, so they've got that really kind of stern furrowed look down the bottom, and then they blend to the forehead at the top. So we need a couple of nose wrinkles in there, and then the two main forehead wrinkles at the top. And I'm going to blend them out. So usually I'll blend out one side and then have the other side have quite a steep kind of drop down to where the wrinkle will be formed. So I'm using a mix of the Ken's tools and this rubber tipped tool to kind of smooth that out. I do want the harsher side to still be a little bit blended out, so it's not obviously stuck on the surface, but I want it to be a lot more noticeable than the blended out side, if that makes sense. I'm just going to get the angles right, so I'm going to kind of start taking away some of the clay to get like a built up angle that makes sense to me visually, I guess, is what I was doing there. I'm going to move on to the other wrinkles. So I'm usually doing like each side at the same time to try and get symmetry. It makes it a little bit easier. And again, blending out one of the edges, and then just very slightly blending out the other edge, and then this tool is kind of taking away any excess clay and building up nice ridges. And again, kind of blending out the top a lot more and leaving the bottom leaving the bottom as a more harsh kind of line. And then this last section is not so much a wrinkle as it is like, I'm not sure, it's just kind of a build up. So we've got a flatter piece and a wider piece, and then I'm going to dig away at the center. And again, it's just copying my reference image. Once we got that, I can dig away a little bit more to kind of extend the wrinkles. Then get back into the wrinkles and just kind of take away where I think there's excess clay and just change the shape a little bit more. So I'm going to check it with my pattern and then kind of draw over it if I think it needs to be extended. Now, using the cling wrap for the same purpose as before, I'm going to go into the wrinkles and just kind of push them down a bit more, and the glad wrap kind of softens it, and then I decide, oh, I'm just going to go on with the tools actually and just really kind of refine those wrinkles and take away any excess clay so it doesn't look like it's completely bulging off my head. Just kind of redefine where those lines are. And I think like the only explanation of what I'm doing is just what visually looks like. If it looks wrong, I'm just gonna try and fix it, and that might be harder to communicate in words, especially because I filmed this about 3 weeks ago, maybe more. So I'm kind of like, I don't know what I was doing, but you know, I don't know, maybe it's still helpful to watch, hopefully. I think now I'm just making the wrinkles look a bit more exaggerated by going in and kind of defining the spaces between them, like the crevices. I'm gonna go in again with the cling wrap and just kind of deepen those crevices. The Boomty tool. And then I'm going to start putting some skin texture back in now that I'm happy with the shape. So I'm going to use the brush again, kind of drag it across to get some soft lines. Same thing with the rake. I'm going to go in multiple directions just so I get a variation in the texture so it's not just flat. I'm going to use the brush also to push down to get a little bit of that pore texture. And then I'm also going to go over it with the stencil tool to kind of just gently press in and also give it a little bit of a pore texture. Just something that I'm pretty new to doing, so I'm not the best at it yet. I think I thought that when I pulled it out of the mold there were lots of air bubbles, but watching this video now I'm like, oh, they weren't air bubbles, they were sculpted holes because you made the pores way too big. But again, sandpaper and then the sponge to kind of get that effect. And then I like, looking at it with the skin texture, there are some areas that I want to be flatter or smoother or more exaggerated, so I'm going to go in and just retexture it a little bit. Maybe redefine some of those crevices. And again, a bit more skin texturing, just basically the same thing again as before, with the brush and then the rake. And then I take away the cling wrap and do the sandpaper and the sponge again. Put some baby powder over it with a brush. This helps just to kind of do you know what it does? It does something. I'm going to go over some more kind of pore texturing. And again, I think I was just kind of making these too big because it ended up showing through a bit too much in the final one. Then the sponge helps to kind of smooth it out a bit. Again, redefining some of those wrinkles, and I got a thicker plastic this time for that. So then I'm going to go over the edge again and just make sure that edge is really clean. There won't be any excess gelatin. So I've got a clean blended out edge. And then once you're finished, you can hold it up to your head. So what I would suggest is probably sculpting it a couple of times. The first sculpt of mine didn't turn out very good. I would probably suggest sculpting it 2 or 3, even more times than that, until you're happy with it, especially if it's a new thing. But what I found helpful is using like one of the metal scrapers to neatly scrape the whole sculpture off my ceramic tile. And then you can hold the sculpture up against your forehead in a mirror and see how it actually fits you. And that way you might be like, oh, this is too big or too bulgy or too whatever, and then you can adjust that for the second or third sculpt so you're a bit happier with how it will turn out. And next up, I'll put a video for how I make the mold and run the gelatin through it, and I've also got a video up of the application. Alright, thanks for watching, bye!